Hello and welcome to Unrecognised Heroes, the official podcast brought to you by the National AI Awards and the National Cyber Awards. This is the podcast where we dive into the latest innovations, challenges and success stories in the world of cybersecurity. I'm your host Ellie, and today I'm really excited to be joined by Carolyn Swinney. Carolyn works within the MOD, she's a National Cyber Awards winner, and she's also completed a PhD in AI algorithms. I'll let Carolyn introduce herself formally, but welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you.
Thank you.
Let's start at the beginning then, Carolyn. What first sparked your interest to get into this wonderful world of cybersecurity, and how did your career path kind of unfold to getting to where you are today to join the MOD?
Sure. Well, I didn't grow up sort of dreaming about working for the RAF. In fact, I remember being the age of 18 and behind a bar and adamant that I'd never join anything where people told me what to do. So I guess what changed was over time I had a much clearer sense of what I cared about, and which was learning, being challenged and protecting people. So after school, I worked in bars, and I ended up as an assistant manager in a cocktail bar, and it was loads of fun. But I hit a point where I had itchy feet to learn more, and I asked myself, what do I genuinely love? And the answer was music. And it had been there my whole life, like through every high and low. So I went back to college to study music. And that's where I realized that under the sort of emotion of it all, music was fundamentally just numbers and patterns. So that nudged me towards engineering. And I applied to study engineering at the University of Essex, but without having the grades. So a lecturer called Dr. Steve Sandwine said to me, go away, you have 6 months, study for your maths A level, get the grade and come back. So I went away, I studied every night, I took the exam, but I didn't hit the grade, I was one below. But he took a chance on me, and he still offered me a place because of the determination I'd shown, and he told me that my attitude and my drive would be what would get me through the maths that I was about to face, and he was right. So I graduated with the first class honours, and that experience hardwired, I guess, a couple of things into me. I love tackling difficult problems, and when somebody takes a chance on me, I'll work incredibly hard to justify that trust. And it's also why I'm very keen to do the same for others whenever I can. So then after university, my gran passed away and left me some money. And I used that to go and do charity work and travel through Southeast Asia on doing missionary projects. So I remember things like, being on an island in the Philippines and, there being a family giving up their bed for me for the night. And that bed was just like a wooden pallet with a very poorly mosquito net, which was not in reality, not going to keep anything out. And then the next day realizing that they'd slept outside on the mud to give me their bed. So it was humbling, life-changing. But I came back from that with a very clear desire that I didn't want to do a job that made money for a company. I wanted to be in a role where I was protecting people and really contributing to something bigger than myself. So that's where the RAF starts to come into focus. And I'd always had a soft spot for it because my grandparents met in uniform during the Second World War. So I applied to join both the RAF and I also applied to join the police. But my intent really was to join the RAF. I had a short spell working at British Telecom while the applications were going through, and I worked as a research engineer. And during that time, I got really involved with the local community and ended up setting up a charity. And then one day I got a call offering me a place in police training. And I took it because I was just so loving being part of the community where I was. So I cancelled the RAF application and I joined as a constable responding to 999 calls. And those years really taught me like a huge amount about people and pressure and judgment, how to talk situations down and trust my intuition and support people, really at the most vulnerable. But as time went on, I got itchy feet again. I wanted to learn something new. And unfortunately, at that time in the police, there were no opportunities to specialise. unless you'd done a minimum number of years. And I really, really wanted to do firearms. But the police were incredibly supportive and, kept an open door for me, which gave me the confidence to sort of be able to choose a path, a different path. And I restarted my RAF application. I went back to uni, did a master's degree to try and get my head back into engineering. And I started RAF training. So the spark for the RAF was really a combination of family, a commitment to protecting people rather than generating profit, and a love of a good challenge, really. Yeah.
That's an amazing story. Just listening to that, it really goes to show actually that you don't need to go down a particular kind of career route, or you don't need to have studied computer science to get into a cybersecurity career. There are so many other pathways in, which is really quite nice and inspiring. I love the story about your travels, albeit sad from the way it came about, of course, but inspiring nonetheless. That leads me on to my next question, actually, Carolyn. Were there any kind of pivotal moments or mentors who helped you kind of guide your journey into the MOD?
Yes, a couple of people stand out immediately. The first is a retired Air Commodore called John J.W. Warrener. So when I was on initial engineering training and we were briefed on all the different career paths that we could take in the RAF, two things really stood out for me. One day I wanted to command 591 Signals Unit, and a US internship that was aimed at developing future cyber leaders. So the internship was really designed for fresh US graduates, and as I joined the RAF a bit later in life to most, this was like well outside of the usual profile. And JW found out about this and just went out of his way to fight my corner with the US. And it took a year of back and forth, but in the end they agreed to take me, and that's what really kicked off my cyber pathway in the RAF. So I asked him to mentor me because despite the level he was operating at, he still made time to go to bat for something that was, objectively a really small issue on his desk. And I wanted to learn from somebody who consistently put people first. And then to this day, so when I'm facing a big decision or a difficult situation, he's one of the first people I ring, not to sort of tell me what to do, but to challenge my thinking.
Yeah.
And then the second sort of pivotal moment was the end of 2020. I just come out of commanding 591 Signals Unit and I was pretty exhausted. And for the first time, I seriously considered whether maybe I'd done my bit for the RAF and whether it was time for me to move on. And I was in the US speaking on a panel, and I found myself talking this through with the CEO of a company called Tanium, who's an incredible man called Dan Streetman, and somebody who had served in the military before moving into industry.
Okay.
But still, cared about public service, continued to serve in different ways. And he listened, shared his own experience of making that transition, and then said something like very simple that landed pretty hard with me. So he told me that I wasn't going to make a bad choice either way. So in other words, like the quality of that next chapter would be about how I showed up, not whether I picked the right path. So that took a lot of pressure off. And following that, I had a holiday. I started a new role in London, had a few more conversations with JW, and realised that I just genuinely still loved being in the RAF. So yeah, so while I still love it and I feel like I'm adding value, I'll continue to stay, and hugely grateful for the people who stepped in at key moments, whether it's the mentors I've asked for like JW, or the ones that have simply kind of appeared at the right time like Dan Streetman and pushed me to think a bit differently.
I think the value of mentorship is so important. And like you say, they always kind of show up at those pivotal moments where you kind of have decisions to make or entering a new situation. But I guess talking about where you've got to now, what does your kind of current role involve and how has it evolved over that time?
Well, so I joined the RAF as a communications and electronics engineering officer. But I'm now part of the cyberspace profession. So the RAF has kind of changed in itself to recognise the significance of cyber as a profession. I've spent most of my career in cyber-focused posts, including commanding 591 Signals Unit, which delivers defensive cyber operations for the RAF. But at the moment, my day job is actually as a student. So I'm on the Advanced Command and Staff course. It's a year-long defence studies programme designed to prepare people to plan and lead operations at the operational and the strategic level. So our syndicates are a mix of RAF, Navy, Army, civil servants, and also international officers from 47 different nations. So you spend a lot of time thinking through problems from different national and single service perspectives. And day to day, that means a mix of academic study, research, practical planning exercises, looking at how and why militaries operate the way they do and how we might need to adapt for future threats. And then learning about command and leadership, which is my favourite bit. But sometimes I do pinch myself thinking, when in life would you ever get the opportunity to be like mixing and learning from all these different cultures and perspectives? And I think, as Socrates supposedly said, the more I learn, the more I realise how little I know. So the more I engage with the academics on the course, my peers, having time to reflect, the more I find myself unlearning some of my assumptions. So what I'm really discovering, I guess, is that the world is far more complex than I'd allowed for previously, and straightforward answers are pretty rare. So you have to really approach problems with an open, questioning mindset.
That's incredibly interesting. And I think it goes to kind of hand in hand with your mention earlier around your travels and your love for learning. It sounds like you sound very passionate about being very open-minded and learning new things, which I think is always key, right, to developing yourself personally and professionally. I'd like to just touch on joining the MOD or other agencies. As a woman working in what's often seen, I suppose, in a male-dominated area, what has your experience personally been like within the MOD?
So I'm very aware that my experience isn't universal, and I know there are, women out there who've had much tougher time than I've had. But for me personally, I've been very fortunate. I've mostly worked with teams and leaders who have judged me on what I've delivered, not on my gender. I've been given opportunities in, engineering, cyber, command posts. And even before the RAF, when I worked as a police officer, this was also a very male-dominated environment. But as well, a lesson I learned from that was, when on response teams, when you're responding to 999 calls, it was like really simple. Everybody brought something different. So you used whatever strengths that you had to get the job done. In my case, sometimes that meant crawling through a window or a door panel because I was the smallest. But other times it might have meant talking the situation down, but it never felt like I was the woman on the team. I was just part of the team.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that every environment is perfect. So sometimes you might be the only woman in a room or present when a comment has landed badly. What helps is having leaders who have backed me and peers, both male and female, who treat inclusion as, everybody's responsibility, and being that leader and peer to other people too. So, as I've become more senior and in leadership roles, I try to use that position to make it easier for others. So being visible, mentoring, calling out unhelpful behavior when it matters, and just making sure that if somebody is like the only in the room, they're not left to carry that on their own.
Yeah. Have you seen a shift in the culture of, I suppose, representation of women in defence roles over the years?
Yes, I have. When I first joined, it was completely normal to be the only woman like in the room, whether that was an engineering context or on a cyber course or in a briefing. And it still happens, but it's far less common now. So there are more women coming through STEM roles, more women in technical roles, more women in command positions, and that visibility really matters. So it's just so much more normal now to look around a room and see mixed teams rather than just one woman. So I see it as part of my job and my responsibility, like I said before, to use my position to be visible and to back others, to help create teams where, the next generation of women coming through don't have to think of themselves as women in cyber. They're just seen as cyber professionals.
Yeah, I like that very much. If you were to give kind of one piece of advice to somebody thinking about a career in the MOD or wider civil service, do you have a piece of advice that you would give them, Carolyn?
Yeah, I'd probably say a few things. First, and you already touched on it, my path was anything but straightforward. So don't wait till you feel like you're a perfect fit on paper. None of what I've done looks like a neat graduate brochure, but it's all been useful. So if you're motivated by service, willing to work hard, there is space for you, even if you don't tick every box in the job description on day one. Second would be, don't do it on your own. Like, I would not be where I am without people who have fought my corner, from the academic who took the risk on me, when I missed the grades, to senior officers who have pushed for opportunities I technically didn't fit into. And, all the colleagues who have been on a sounding board. So asking people you respect to mentor you.
Yeah.
The worst case is that they say no, and you'll be surprised how many will say yes. And then lastly, and most importantly, whether it's a career in the MOD, the RAF, or something totally different, the very best advice I would give anyone is to choose something you feel excited about. If you feel excited about it, I would highly recommend a career in defence to anyone who wants to have, a fun, challenging career that serves a bigger purpose.
I think your passion, Carolyn, for trying to do good and make an impact segues us nicely onto the recognition for your contributions and your work within the MOD, which led you to winning the National Cyber Awards. So how did it feel for you to have that recognition?
Honestly, it felt a bit surreal, because you don't really go into this line of work expecting national awards. Most of what we do is behind the scenes, so it was a real honour. But I didn't experience it, or I didn't feel it as my award, because although it had my name on it, it represented a lot of people who did the hard work with me. So the things that, we were recognised for only happened because I had just an exceptional team and strong support from colleagues in other organisations as well, who were willing to back us, challenge us and take on risk. So my job was to sort of set the direction during that time and fight for what we believed needed to be done to operationalise cyber and protect the team so that they could deliver it. So I was proud, but also incredibly grateful that the work itself was being recognised. Yeah.
It sounds as though you didn't see it coming, but that was my next question, really. Were you expecting it? Was it a complete surprise on the night for you?
Yeah, I definitely wasn't expecting it. And, as I said, we don't do what we do for national with that sort of thing in mind. And generally speaking, my experience of awards so far, nominations tend to come from, high up. And in my case, it was a member of my own team, my warrant officer, that put me forward for the award. And, that to me almost meant more than the actual trophy, like knowing that someone who sees you every day felt strongly enough about what we were doing together to write that nomination. So that was a real win. And the announcement on the night was a huge surprise and a lovely moment. But the bit that really stayed with me was that it came from the team and not from above, and it acted as a visible signal, because a lot of what we were doing was behind the scenes and involved pushing into new territory, which can make people nervous, especially if things have been done a particular way for a long time. So when you're pushing boundaries, there are days that you wonder, am I just being difficult? So the award was a reminder that the direction you were taking and the risks that we were asking people to take with us made sense, like beyond our own echo chamber. So it hasn't changed, my fundamental approach, but reinforced my willingness, if anything, to kind of back teams who are trying to do hard and worthwhile things.
Speaking of doing difficult things, Carolyn, I understand that you completed a PhD in AI algorithms at the University of Essex, I think a couple of years ago. What inspired you to return to academia?
So I asked the RAF if they would let me do a PhD, and it was because I was coming to the end of a cyber role that I just absolutely loved, and I could see how quickly machine learning, deep learning were starting to shape cyber and electromagnetic operations, and I just didn't want to step away into a more generic role. Just as things were getting interesting. So I asked a fairly bold question: would the RAF cyberspace profession fund a defence-sponsored PhD, which was focused on problems that mattered to defence? And as I said before, I've been really fortunate to have people who were willing to take risks on me. So there were specific people in the cyberspace profession and in the Air and Space Warfare Centre that backed the idea and fought for it. That's how the sponsorship happened. And I was inspired to go back into academia because I just wanted to keep contributing to cyber in a more rigorous and long-term way. But I honestly was not expecting the answer to be yes when I asked to do it. So I would say, if there's something that you believe will add real value, however ambitious or unconventional it sounds, just ask and make the case, because the worst you're going to hear is no, and sometimes you'll be as surprised as me to hear yes.
You have so much gumption, Carolyn. I think that's something that's a common theme so far throughout the episode. Just, like you say, the worst that can happen is no. Why not actually give it a try? Balancing a full-time role, though, alongside a PhD, how did you manage that?
So I won't pretend that it's always a perfect balance. There were definitely parts where the PhD dominated, but a few things made it manageable. First, I was excited about the topic. So going back to doing things you're excited about, they become a whole lot easier. I really did care about the problems that I was researching. And second, I got quite ruthless about my time and my energy. So while my years in the police taught me very deeply that this life can be taken from us at any moment, and that makes our time and our energy incredibly precious, I'd say the PhD taught me much more about how to manage that time and energy. So I'm still ruthless with it now. So if I'm spending my time and energy on something or someone, I genuinely care. But I treated the PhD like a job. I had milestones and I set aside fixed times where I just worked on it. And then I had non-negotiables outside work and study. So for me, that was training, so CrossFit, keeping physically fit, and, spending time with family and close friends. So I guess while passion and a sense of service were the reasons I took it on, it was actually the sort of boring consistency and being willing to say no to other things that got it finished, and treating my time and energy as the precious thing that it is.
It is, yeah, absolutely. And your thesis is titled, and I want to get this right, Signal Classification at Discrete Frequencies Using Machine Learning. Now, in simple terms, what does that mean? Tell us all about it.
So my background is electronics engineering. So I've always been interested in radio frequency signals and the wider electromagnetic spectrum, as well as sort of software and what you traditionally think of as cyber. We often default to thinking about the internet and wired networks, but I've always been fascinated by those links, access links that sit around them, because they are access points into systems and networks too. So the core problem I looked at with the PhD was about how can we detect and recognize unwanted signals, around whatever systems or platforms that we're wanting to protect. So one example of that is small drones operating near our systems. So if you're sitting on an aircraft or in a ground station, you want to know very quickly, is there something there that shouldn't be? What is it? What is it doing? So the research the research question itself was whether we could use deep learning techniques to detect and classify those signals reliably. So, for instance, for me to be able to say to you, yep, there's a signal present, it looks like this type of drone platform, and it appears to be hovering, for example. So the contribution of my research was in how we process the signals. So I treated them as images, essentially graphs of the signal, and then I explored something called transfer learning, which is where you use a model that's trained for one purpose for a different purpose. So in my case, I was using models that are trained to or pre-trained to process images for signal data. And that matters because raw signal data is very high volume. It can be difficult and sensitive to collect, especially in the UK. So being able to piggyback on pre-trained image models means that, you can explore getting good performance with less bespoke training data and potentially lower computational cost. So in practical terms, that sort of approach would help us build faster decision cycles. AI isn't a replacement for the deep specialized humans that we have, but it can point them faster to where they need to look. So the value, in making us more efficient, basically. And if we think about the electromagnetic environment as it gets more congested and threats become more common, the ability to know that something unwanted is there and to know what it is quickly and reliably, it's, increasingly important.
That all sounds so incredibly in-depth and interesting, and I'm sure that it was a lot of hard work, but well worth it from, the results and the research that you're able to discover through that learning. And I would just wonder, what has that process of academic research kind of taught you, either personally or professionally? I'm sure a lot of discipline by the sounds of it went into continuing with it.
Yeah. The biggest thing that it's taught me is to stay curious, but as you said, be disciplined about it. So research forces you to turn I'm curious into a proper question and test it properly and then accept the answer, even if it's not the answer that you wanted. So you kind of learn to let the data and the analysis challenge your assumptions rather than just looking for evidence that you were right all along. So on a personal level, the PhD felt quite a lot like when I went through initial RAF training. You started slightly terrified, not entirely sure you belong there. And then you come out the other side realizing that you're capable of far more than you'd allowed yourself to believe. At the start of the doctorate, we were given a talk on imposter syndrome. And I remember thinking, that won't be me. So fast forward a few weeks and I was completely overwhelmed and questioning, whether I had it in me to finish. And at that point, I did something quite simple, but practical. And I covered the wall in my study with every certificate and award I'd ever earned. Not because I wanted some weird kind of shrine, but it gave me a visual reminder that I had done hard things before and finished them. So on days where I really felt that, like an imposter, I'd look at the wall and then go back to taking the next small step, whether it's the next experiment or the next chapter to write. And, even when I really couldn't see the top of the mountain, that's what helped me go. And progress, I think, often feels small and unclear while you're right in the middle of it. But if you just keep moving and trusting in the process, leaning on the evidence rather than your doubts, you should end up on the top of the mountain.
Do you think that continuous learning and curiosity that you mentioned, staying curious, are essential in cyber and defense roles?
Yes, absolutely. They're essential. With cyber, we're in a constant race with threat actors. So, threat actors adapt, they share tools, they iterate faster than formal structures can do sometimes. So if you stand still, either technically or intellectually, you're effectively moving backwards. So continuous learning and curiosity are, in my opinion, how we sort of begin to keep pace. At a practical level, like cyber's really about problem solving. So the threats, they don't always arrive like neatly labeled. So you can be dealing with partial information, odd behaviors on a network maybe, or new ways that people are trying to get into systems. So if you aren't curious and you don't instinctively ask what's really going on here and go digging, you might miss something. And it's not just about the technology and defense more broadly. There's context that's constantly shifting, geopolitics, how adversaries think, how our own people and societies use technology. So curiosity kind of pushes you to look beyond your immediate. So even what I was saying before about understanding RF as well and its role with networks today. So yeah, and professionally, I'd also say that continuous learning is a humility check. So the moment you start believing like that you're, cracked everything, you stop seeing the weak signals that something's changed. And the people that I trust most in cyber and in defense are the ones who do stay humble and who are still reading, still asking naive questions, still willing to say, I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. So yes, curiosity and continuous learning, definitely part of the job description.
I think that's so true. Staying curious in all careers, I suppose, whether they're technical roles or not, is really important. And like you say, that continuous learning. If somebody was joining the MOD or going into more broadly perhaps a cyber or AI focused role tomorrow, what piece of advice would you give them personally?
This is by the buzzwords. If you enjoy solving problems, thinking logically, you're willing to keep learning, there's definitely space for you in cyber and AI, even if you don't feel like the perfect technical fit on day one. Don't wait. Again, going back to that first conversation, don't wait until you feel completely ready, because I don't think anybody in this space feels fully qualified. So, apply for the internship, the graduate role, whatever it is, and be honest about what you know and about what you're doing to try and sort of close the gaps. Talk to people as well who are already doing the kind of job that you want to do. Ask them what they'd expect from somebody starting out, and then try to deliberately build towards that. And just being brave enough to put yourself forward before you feel entirely comfortable with it.
That's great advice. And we've talked around a little bit curiosity and the willingness to learn, but are there any other particular qualities or skills that you think would be essential for somebody considering this career pathway?
Yeah, so definitely curiosity, which we've covered, questioning things, sometimes pushing the boundaries of how things have been done before. But second to that, or, equal to that, would be humility, because, you will be dealing with complex problem sets. The answers aren't always instant, and you have to sometimes be willing to say, I don't know yet, and just be honest about the situation. And then lastly, I'd say communication, because it's not enough just to say, I don't know. We need to really be translators, and we need to translate what has or is happening technically into language that somebody who isn't technical can understand. So, for dealing with, say, cyber incidents, that might be, what is the risk? Are there any safety implications? What have the team's done already to solve the problem, and what's their plan to resolve it? So, yeah, curiosity, humility, and communication would be my top three.
I think that's a great bundle for success, to be honest, hearing your story today and how much you've covered throughout your career and kind of looking back over that. Is there a moment that stands out for you that's made you kind of feel especially proud of yourself for everything that you've been able to accomplish?
Yeah, so that's an easy one. It would be commanding 5-man-1 signals unit. So from the moment I first heard about that as a role we could do when I was in training, it was what I wanted. So when I was selected to lead the unit, it was for me like a genuine dream come true sort of moment. 591 Signals Unit, if you're not familiar with it, was formed in June of 1952. And it's the oldest signals unit in the RAF and in air. And it's been continuously on operations since it was formed. So it delivers intelligence-led defensive cyber operations for the RAF, so responding to incidents worldwide, essentially watching over air operations and stepping in when something isn't right. And the badge for the unit is a kingfisher, and the motto is Vigilante, which translates as watchfully. So the story goes that the badge was influenced by the unit's time at somewhere called RAF Medmingham, which was near the River Thames, and the kingfishers used to sit on the bank and kind of silently watch over the water for any movement that would give away what was beneath the surface. And as I said earlier, like I've always been driven by that deep desire to protect people rather than just making money for an organisation. So commanding a unit whose whole identity was about quietly and humbly watching and protecting the RAF, its people, its operations, was just the perfect fit. So, what I'm most proud of isn't just the operations, it's the sense of continuity and community that we built during that time. So I was a big advocate for the unit's history. And during my time in command, I had the privilege of organising the 70th anniversary. And we went out looking for like as many former 591 Signals Unit personnel as we could find. And we discovered this group of veterans who had served on the unit in the 1980s, and they were still meeting up every year. So bringing them together that night with the younger people who were currently serving on the unit was just incredibly powerful. And we left with this shared determination to then formalise that community. So that 70th was also the moment that we said goodbye to my first warrant officer, Jamie, who had taken the unit with my predecessor through some demanding years with COVID. And in the period kind of in between his departure and my new warrant officer, Paul's arrival, I was very fortunate to have somebody outstanding step up and effectively carry that mantle with me. But when Paul arrived, he became like my partner in crime very quickly to try and turn this intent for an association and a formalised community into something real. And you don't do anything in command without being hand in glove with your warrant officer. It's a very genuine partnership that goes well beyond words and just a really special bond. So together with a small team of very driven people, Paul and I set up what became 591 Signals Unit Association. We asked one of the veterans to chair the committee, brought in serving, non-serving members who just cared very deeply about the Kingfisher, and our unit historian, Daz, was a key part of that because his passion for, preserving and telling this story of the unit was a big part of, why we can draw so deeply on that history. And again, it just comes back to really special people. And a year later, we held a ceremony at St Clement Danes, which is the central church of the RAF. And we had the unit badge etched onto the slate floor. And then at that moment, the association also formally stood up as a charitable body. So today it runs events, keeps people connected, protects that heritage. So while I am incredibly proud of what we did operationally while I was in command, I'm especially proud of the association, alongside my, previous warrant officer, Paul, and just a really strong team of passionate individuals that, help make sure our sort of watchful Kingfisher and everything it represents about protecting the RAF and its people, it will outlast single tour now, including mine.
I'm blown away. That's such a beautiful story. And, not only did you lead, but then to go on and create a community out of that is just really inspiring. And to be honest, it's quite the epitome of what the awards and this podcast were created for, because you wouldn't ordinarily hear that story. Thank you for sharing that with us all, because I think a lot of other people will be touched by that as well. I think that's incredible. What's next, Carolyn? What's next? It sounds like you've done so much and you're so incredibly inspiring. What's next for you both, I suppose, professionally or even academically?
That's very kind. Thank you. Yes, but again, it's all a team effort. It's never just been me. It's always been amazing people behind me. But for me, professionally, I will finish this advanced command and staff course next summer. So the honest answer is I don't know yet where exactly I'll go, what I'll be doing. My hope is that I'll move into another cyber or sort of electromagnetic focused role where I can really use the specialist skills that I got over the years and keep contributing to the RAF and wider defence. Academically though, in June I'm going to be giving a keynote at the Cyber Science Conference in London. And it's quite a special conference to me because it was the first place that I presented after graduating with my PhD. And the 2026 theme is cyber science in the era of artificial intelligence. So it will cover things that I'm really passionate about, cyber, the responsible use of AI, and then the human side of it as well, because, as we both know, cyber, isn't just about tools, and AI actually makes the people and the cultural sort of side of it even more critical to get right. In parallel to that, I'm writing a paper for consideration with the Royal United States Institute, or RUSI, and their cyber effects network, who are going to be publishing an edited collection on offensive cyber and other cyber effects operations. And the Cyber Effects Network aims to generate new thinking on theory and practice of offensive cyber operations. And that's with the help to try and develop the next generation of UK experts. So I'm going to be writing a piece on cyber and electromagnetic operations for consideration in that publication. And then alongside that, I'm about to publish a small book for primary school children to help them, start coding with something called Scratch. And it's like a visual programming language that helps kids build games and stories. And it was developed by MIT. That STEM is really important to me. I think it's the one, it's one small way of helping that next generation see themselves as creative and curious problem solvers, not just users of technology. And then on the heritage side, we're planning the next 591 Signals Unit Association event. We're going to hopefully be at Danesfield House, which is the former RAF Medmingham site that I mentioned before, this thing at the very heart of that Kingfisher story. And that evening with the association will mark the 75th year now of continuous operations. So more than a social, it's more about connecting that past to the present and reminding people, that they're part of something bigger. So I guess in short, I want to stay close to the front line of cyber and EM professionally, but also academically continuing to push that thinking around AI, cyber and defence, and keep on investing in the next generation through STEM, and also investing in communities that are really at the heart of protecting the RAF and ultimately the UK.
Carolyn, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. It's such a kind of inspiring reminder that the power of perseverance and your passion and purpose really for both public service and personal growth is just, incredibly inspiring. Best of luck with everything that you've got ahead. And I'm very sure we'll be hearing lots more from you in future. Thank you so much, Ruth. Yeah, I really appreciate your time.